Hey, y'all. It's Farley, your host of the Writer's Edge podcast. And today I have a special guest. Please welcome Nicole Coleman, pelvic floor expert and creator of the Pelvic-Core Methods. So welcome, Nicole. How are you?
Great, Farley. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you for having me on your awesome show. I'm so excited.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Very excited to have you and kind of delve more into what we talked about in episode 2 of the podcast. We started talking about the core and how much more it is than just your abs and just how everything works together between the pelvic floor, the abdominals, the diaphragm, all that good stuff. So I was like, oh, let's get Nicole on here, my friend and expert in all things pelvic floor. And so let's kind of delve into more about how the pelvic floor and the core work. And then we can kind of bring it around to how we use that in writing and all of our activities that we're doing.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it in episode 2 when you talked about the components of the core. And the way you describe the glute as a big link to the back muscles, the deep core, and the pelvic floor. So the hip and sacral area is that connecting force from the pelvic floor to the deep core with the abdominal muscles and back extensors and even the diaphragm, and furthermore breathing. And so I refer to the core as a 6-sided box. The top is the diaphragm. Some people consider the vocal cords the top of the core. Okay. I typically, because of how important breathing is, I typically refer to the diaphragm and as the top and the pelvic floor as the bottom. And then the back extensors is the back, and the transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis as the front, and then the external internal oblique quadratus lumborum as the side, and that's kind of your 6-sided box. And the hip and sacral muscles, including the glute and the hip rotators, the rotator cuff of the pelvis, are that transitional muscle group that translate forces when we do things like walk or ride. And they're all important in working in concert. And then our breathing plays a big role in all of that, because breathing impacts intra-abdominal pressure and how all these sides work together. And then breathing is really important with intra-abdominal pressure, because intra-abdominal pressure is a huge way to talk about forces generated that impact all of those structures.
Okay.
So you can see my cat, Jojo, already making an appearance.
Hi, Jojo. You're the second cat on the Writer's Edge podcast.
Yeah, he always wants to be on camera. So he's a future star. So here he is. He doesn't care about the pelvic core. He just wants attention. He wants to get his face out there into kitty world.
So let's use the KISS method and kind of review the foundation for our non-PT or non-healthcare professionals. So we've got the pelvic floor and the diaphragm, or your top and bottom. And then a couple of your abdominal muscles are the big players in the front, along with your obliques on the side and the QL. We'll just try to keep it simple here. And then the back extensors, you're talking about the muscles that really kind of go down along the spine, so that we kind of keep everybody grounded in what musculature we're talking about.
Yes.
So
perfect.
So intra-abdominal pressure, breathing. Yeah, let's dive into there. You know, we talk about breathing a lot in competing in
Okay.
translating and getting rid of nerves when we're competing at a high level, but also how it translates nervousness to our horses or not. So breathing can be a big component of competition, but we haven't really probably talked about it. We haven't talked about it much. So that's why we're here to delve into more of how it works within the core and how all of that powerhouse of the foundation of the core you're talking about works.
Yeah. So this is always something that's very handy for me to use as a visual.
Okay.
Now, the podcast listeners won't be able to see this, but you can imagine if you're holding one of those toys that you squeeze and something pops out.
This is going to get awesome. Jojo.
So when we hold our breath, when we do anything where we generate force, that can be as simple as getting up out of a chair, getting out of bed, lifting something, carrying something, holding onto your horse. That would be a good way to translate that. And then going through any of the activities that require you to adjust your posture. Your breath translates to increased pressure in the abdomen. And if you hold your breath and generate forces to do something like bend or lift, that force pushes down.
Okay.
Just like that. And you can see on the toy, you won't be able to hear this on the podcast. But imagining that force pushes down, and at the bottom is the pelvic floor and your pelvic organs. So in women, it's the bladder, the uterus, and the rectum. And in men, it's the bladder and the prostate and the rectum.
Okay.
And that system is more sensitive in women because there are 3 openings down there. So there's an easier ability to lose force. And in men, there are 2 openings, and they have a long urethra. So it's not as easy for men typically to lose force through things like incontinence.
Okay.
And we can get into that later.
Sure.
But with breathing, it's important to exhale when you do anything that requires effort, because then you dispel or you move the force out through your mouth versus pushing down, just like that.
Okay.
And then when you create intra-abdominal pressure, it pushes down on those organs and it creates force on the spine. And so that's how a lot of people develop chronic low back pain, is by not learning how to breathe properly when they do activities. And then all of the components of that core, which I tend to call the pelvic core, so that people get reminded that there's more than just the six-pack muscles. They work together in how to respond to that force. So breathing and intra-abdominal pressure are hugely important and have big impacts on other structures like the pelvic organs, the pelvic floor, the spine, the muscles, and even the abdomen. So.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So say you don't breathe right, like you don't exhale and you continue to put pressure on your pelvic floor, on your spine. Could that essentially cause chronic pain over time if you keep hitting that?
Yep.
Something's got to give at some point.
Yeah. So wherever that pressure goes over time, it's going to break it down. Just like over time, water can break down rock on as they crash into the sidewalls. Same thing with breath and pressure on the spine, is that it can cause deterioration of structures. So you can develop chronic back pain. You can even develop chronic pelvic pain from not breathing properly when you're doing activities, because those muscles can then sometimes get really weak and loose. Sometimes they get tight and painful.
That's so interesting, because as much as we as PTs deal with breathing and breath, and I think we still sometimes lose sight of that because we're trying to get so many other things done with our clients. Or if we're riding, we might think of a breathing strategy as calming nerves before we go in the arena. But it's controlling your breath throughout the whole ride, throughout the whole task of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yes. And oftentimes holding your breath is either an indication of not having proper form for an activity or not having adequate stability. So it's a very common thing in any activity for people to hold their breath if they haven't practiced breathing through the technique and they haven't developed the appropriate balance of stabilizing muscles. And it's a way for us to try to use our diaphragm and that pressure through the abdomen to generate more force. But what happens over time is that we don't actually generate more force over time. We just get an initial increase in the ability to do something, and then our performance actually goes down after that. So it's a false sense of security that we create within our own bodies. And it's something that almost everybody does at some point or another when they're either learning something or they haven't developed appropriate stabilizing strategies or the appropriate stability needed for the activity.
Oh, that is so good. I feel like we're dropping so many knowledge bombs tonight because because with that example, what comes to my mind is like when you go to lift something that that is heavier than you expect it to be, or a force like drops on you that's heavier than you expected, and you go and tighten down on everything trying to withstand that force, and then it just pushes all the way through. Like you drop whatever you're carrying, or you can't lift whatever you're trying to lift, something like that.
Yeah, a really big thing you can listen for, and it's easier if you're listening to someone else or watching someone else, is if they do an activity and then they go, kind of that big exhale afterwards. That is a pretty good indicator that they were holding their breath with something like trying to carry something or hold something that they weren't expecting that was heavy, and then suddenly releasing afterwards. That's an indication that they were probably holding their breath. And that's something, working with my clients in the past, that I give to them as a cue to listen for at home is if they make that sound.
Oh, such a good tip. Such a good tip, because I think a lot of what we're talking about, that we talked about in episode 2 and other episodes that are coming out soon, go towards body awareness. And we often don't have that. You and I, as physical therapists, and we've been trained in this, we kind of end up getting crazy body awareness, right? And so we're always trying to teach people, to be more body aware. And I think it's really good to give different common cues that normal people, since you and I both aren't normal on many scales.
Yeah, many. That's why we get along.
But normal everyday things that you can go, oh, Nicole said if I make this sound, that's a telltale sign that I've been holding my breath. Because again, if you're focusing on an activity without body awareness, it's hard to remember that next step of breathing. That just kind of complicates everything, or can.
Yeah, the breath is the sort of that bridge between how our muscles work and how we function. It's an important component that we really tend to overlook so easily in the non-physical therapy world, as well as in the physical therapy world. And I'm sure it plays a big role in riding, like you said. You talk about it with nerves and also translating, your energy to your horse, but then also how you stabilize. Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned before that it's very common for riders and their horse to have the same injury. Mm-hmm. If it's on one side, because of the instability and the attempt to stabilize, is that the horse is doing all the work to recover, and then they develop the same injury. So I think the pelvic core and the breath would be so important for riders who have injuries or want to perform better, because it's going to help people develop that stability for either injury prevention or injury recovery, as well as increasing your performance. So, Olympic athletes really spend a lot of time on their breath, and it's not just because it makes it look better. It actually has a performance and rehab function.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So I give this example all the time on breathing to calm nerves. Like when I'm running barrels or something, I forcibly exhale before I go down the alleyway to make my body start breathing again. Is that a good cue, a good way to kind of start that cue over? Because, the one thing about riding is we have so many things going on at once. Of us trying to stay stable on the horse moving, whatever task we're trying to get done, whether we're running barrels or roping or doing a pattern on the horsemanship pattern or whatever. What would be kind of a good tip to cue us to continue to do our breathing?
Yeah, I mean, exhaling, kind of a big inhale and big exhale before you start or get ready for a specific task is a really good way to encourage your body to start breathing. The diaphragm, that big dome-shaped muscle that controls breathing, you've talked about it. It surrounds the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that has to do with our fight or flight response. And taking a nice big inhalation and exhalation actually helps stimulate that nerve to calm the system. It actually physically helps calm your system down by decreasing your blood pressure and some of the hormones that are associated with that fight or flight response. So it helps calm that down, which can help with focus. And then over time, hopefully you're training by practicing your exhalation and breathing, so that when you get to performance mode, your body knows what to do, because of the amazing thing called muscle memory. Our muscles have little brains in them. So it's really important to do some training, not in performance mode, practicing breath and exhaling with effort in order to train your system to do that more automatically. When the tasks are singular and simple, and then building up from there to, like you said, the many things you have to do when you're riding, which is a lot. So over time, you can build your body's ability to breathe better without having to think about it as much.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect segue, because my next question was going to be, let's get to the dirt of it. Let's start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. My chemistry teacher used to sing that when we were doing equations, by the way. Yeah.
Talk about chemistry.
Right. That's where I know where some of these cliches that I use come from. But
structure and function is what my organic chemistry teacher always said. Everything in life is structure and function. And I thought she was wacko. And as a physical therapist, now I know it's anatomy and physiology, structure and function. And if we understand and know anatomy, how things connect, we can help destruct or deconstruct the problem and reconstruct the body and the functions to be healthier. So
absolutely.
I digress.
No, you actually didn't. That's what's so fun about this. We digress still back to our main point.
Yeah.
So say I'm a rider who's sitting here listening to this conversation and going, okay, I know that I understand the importance, Nicole and Farley have explained the importance of breathing, how it's going to help me in competition and with my horse. Now I need to know how to start, because I know I have a problem with my breathing, and I understand the importance and the why of it now. But now, where would I start to kind of, as you just said, deconstruct and then reconstruct my movement pattern, my body system, things like that?
Yeah, there are two major things to look at and then combine them. So starting with the breath, I talked about a little bit ago, the core is a six-sided box. The pelvic floor muscles are on the bottom, the diaphragm is on the top, and the back and abdominal muscles surround the rest. And with an active exhalation, which is an exhalation through pursed lips, your body automatically engages 5 of the 6 sides.
Okay.
So the top, front, back, left, right will engage, and the pelvic floor doesn't necessarily automatically engage, and nor do we want it to. We want it to be able to work a little bit separately from those, the rest of the muscles. So if you inhale through your nose and then exhale through pursed lips, like you're blowing through a straw, or blowing out a singular candle about arm's length, or like you were going to blow through your fist. Those are some good examples that I can describe without you guys seeing me. That will engage 5 of the 6 sides. So that's the beginning of the 6-sided core hold is an active inhalation and then exhalation. And over the course of the exhalation, what ideally one should feel is that the abdominal muscles will gently lift toward the belly button, toward the spine. The waist will cinch, the belly will flatten, and the back will feel a little snug.
Okay.
So those are indicators of the 5 sides engaging. What you should not feel or see is what we call abdominal doming, which is where the top of the abdomen pulls in, but the bottom kind of paunches out. It should all kind of draw in toward center, essentially. And your tummy should feel a little firmer. Even if you have a layer or 2 of something else, it should feel a little firmer. People always say, oh, well, there's, a little something there. These muscles are not dependent on having a six-pack. You don't need a six-pack, and actually having a six-pack is not necessarily indicative of having a good core.
Okay.
This is more functional, and you can think of it a little bit more like a corset. When you engage these muscles, it's kind of like cinching a corset a little bit. So it stabilizes the back and the pelvis. So that's the first part, is the active exhalation through pursed lips. The second part, which takes a little bit more describing, is to gently engage the pelvic floor muscles. And there are a few thousand ways to do this, but I'll just describe a couple. Is that for women, as I mentioned already, there are 3 openings down there. You want to imagine you're closing them. So with a Kegel, it's very, very gentle, like you're closing the urethra, the vagina, and the anus. And in men, it's like you're pulling the turtle into the shell, or lifting the landing gear, or like you're walking into cold water. Those are some of the terms that have been supported in evidence and that people tend to get.
Sure.
So if you're having trouble still, my favorite thing to do to get people in touch with their pelvic floor, because we can't really see it, is to sit on a towel roll. Just like I say, sit on a towel roll, kind of like a saddle. It goes right in that saddle region. And the pelvic floor attaches from the pubic bone all the way back towards the tailbone. And when you sit on like a hand towel and roll it up and sit on it like a saddle, what the towel is touching is the pelvic floor. And when you gently contract the pelvic floor muscles, there's a slight lift, but your body doesn't lift. So it's not the buttock, glute, thigh muscles. It's the muscles that you can't really see. And you really can't see any movement, but you feel it. And the biggest thing through, working with hundreds, thousands of patients with biofeedback, which is a unit that reads what the muscles are doing, by far, people were over activating these muscles because they're so small. It's like the force of picking up a pencil. We think that it's got to be big and it's got to be grit and heavy. It's much, much smaller and gentler than that. And so you actively exhale through pursed lips to get 5 of the 6 sides. And then you do that gentle lift as you're exhaling for the bottom, the pelvic floor. And that is kind of like a pelvic lock or the 6-sided core activation, where everything is now stable. And if you do it lying down, you tend to feel like everything just feels snug and held together. So that's the 6-sided core hold.
Interesting. So maybe if I'm somebody who's having trouble with that last part of activating my pelvic floor, of getting the Kegel done, what if I took my saddle and put it somewhere, not on a horse, put it on my saddle rack where I could sit on the saddle, and then take that towel roll as you described and put down there on there to kind of help that touch, that tactile feedback? Would that be a good way to kind of be in a good position to work on activating that Kegel versus the laying down that you were just talking about?
Yep, that would be more functional, which is always an important component, is translating the function. It's interesting because you mentioned, I think it was on episode 2, but it might have been episode 3, about how riders and cyclists really are some of the only athletes that wait there through the pelvis. And to the pelvic floor, that can have some different effects than people who run and power lift and do gymnastics and do all sorts of different activities. So, and I don't know the literature and the research, what is true for riders, but I would assume that it would be a high likelihood that some riders develop tight pelvic floor muscles from putting all that weight through. It's very common for cyclists to get tight pelvic floor muscles and sometimes get some nerve irritation down there. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are quite a few riders who have some tight pelvic floor muscles, which would actually require more relaxation in that area. And the way to tell that is when the towel test or the saddle test is if you try to do a squeeze, can you feel it, but can you relax those muscles? That's just as important, because if your muscles can't relax, if you walked around and clenched your teeth all day long, they would get tight and tender. People who do clench develop TMJ issues, where they don't need to strengthen, they need to lengthen those muscles. Or if you imagine walking around with a clenched fist all day, every day, it would get pretty sore and painful. And then it wouldn't be able to do really open or close very well. So it is just as important for those muscles to be able to relax and lengthen. So for those folks who might potentially have some pain in that area or they can't relax, doing some gentle pushes on the towel to lengthen can be a good thing for them. So you've got both sides of the coin of it, could be one or the other.
Sure. And I know in my personal journey that I've had some tightness in the pelvic floor region because those groin muscles also attach up in there. And so if we know if a neighbor is angry, then we're going to wake up the whole neighborhood and get everybody angry often, and everybody going to get tight and pissed off and mad.
Oh, yeah.
And everything. So
it's very common to see groin issues and inner thigh issues along with pelvic floor tightness. Very common. And like you said, they're neighbors. The difference between palpating a pelvic floor muscle, like touching a pelvic floor muscle, and an inner thigh muscle is literally just a slight movement of the finger.
Oh,
because
wow.
they attach on the same part of the pubic bone, just a millimeter or two apart. And I've even had patients where we didn't know if it was their inner thigh muscle or their pelvic floor. And, luckily they, had further testing that helped us identify it, but also learning that how to find the difference. So yeah, you're right. If your neighbor gets angry, it's going to affect you too. So groin, inner thigh tightness can definitely be related to that, especially because the inner thighs clench the horse, and then you get what we call overflow, which is neighboring muscles turning on as well. So then that pelvic floor can be working when it shouldn't necessarily be working all the time, and then tighten that way. So then you need more relaxation and lengthening of those pelvic floor muscles. Back to breathing. Deep breathing helps that.
Oh, it all comes back to the breath. It all just keeps circling back around.
It does. And it annoys me almost when I talk about it, because I'm a former dancer, and I was always being lectured on my breath. And it just frustrated me. And the more I learn and see it, the more I realize, and then the more it pisses me off that I had the same issue. Or when I'm learning something new or trying to, increase something, I hold my breath. So I do it in myself. And even knowing having, like you said, the body awareness, it's hard to really, continue to practice, because it's so simple. We oversee it way too easily. And then it kind of gets, overlooked and not addressed, because we think it's so simple, and then we don't continue to reinforce it. So, yeah, it's kind of frustrating, but it really is that important.
It's so often I'll say it's so oversimple. It's so simple, it's dumb. Like if something is super simple, I'll be like, well, that's dumb. Because we're always so we want the complicated, the fancy, but I'll just be like, it's so simple, it's dumb. And so we often like you just said, we overlook that. Well, it can't be that simple. It has to be more complicated than that. I need to go the next step, or whatever the next step is.
Yeah.
And then you're mad because you just need to come back and do the basics, stay in your lane, get the basics done, and then go to the next lane.
Yes. Yeah, it's hard, because most of us just want to move on to step Z, not work on step A over and over and over again.
Well, yeah, because that step D or B or D is fun and sexy and complicated, and we have to work on it. Step A, breathing's not sexy. That's not fun.
No.
That's what we just take for granted, because it has to happen all the time, every day.
Yeah. You can't go to the gym and work on your breath reps, so it's not something that's going to get you your beach body. It's not something that, is going to get you a date. So yeah, you're right. It's not sexy in lots of ways. But it's a good reminder for me to remember to breathe, and hopefully some information for the listeners that there's a lot going on in the body, but we can start with simple things and work from there.
Yeah, I think we've dropped a lot of fire and a lot of knowledge in this conversation. So I think let's bring it around for everybody, and we're going to summarize what we've talked about. and what could be the next step for somebody. And then we're going to have you on again because we've got so many, like we talked about, the pelvis is where we weight bear in riding. And so we got so many other things going on there that we've got other issues that we need to talk about. But I think we'll talk we'll keep it, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to talk about a pelvic issue at a time for everybody, so we don't explode anybody's minds, including my little pea brain.
Yeah.
So
it's tough to stay on topic because there's so much. So I'm glad that you're directing this orchestra.
Something like that.
Or just noise. Just music in my head.
Because we both get to nerd out, right? We're pelvic PTing, we're rider PTing, and so everybody, we're both nerding out, and so we're gonna have some that are nerding out with us, and then we're gonna have some going, "What you talking about?"
Yeah.
So we've talked about the pelvic core, and that there are 6 sides to it. And that's the pelvic floor, the diaphragm, the abdominals, the obliques, and your back muscles along your spine, essentially. And then we kind of had to do some fun hating and talk about basic breathing and how boring and basic it is, but how important it is. And it's really the key and the first step to getting everything done.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
One thing I forgot to mention, which might be more of what we talk about next time, and you can tell me if this is true, is things like pelvic organ prolapse, hernias, and urinary incontinence can be indicators of a system that's not in balance, as well as pelvic pain, tailbone pain issues, inner thigh issues, chronic pelvic pain with, any of your basic functions that go down there, poop, pee, and sex. That can be indication of tight pelvic floor muscles. And so we often think of pelvic floor and we think Kegels. That's not necessarily the case. But if you have any of those, that can be an indicator that the system is not in balance.
Yes, that's definitely what I want.
Back pain.
Yeah, that's definitely what I want to get into in our next conversation, is really delving into those parts, because that's something that A, not everybody's comfortable with talking about. B, they don't know where to get, they have an issue, but they don't know where to get that knowledge. And then C, they don't know who to get help from and where we need to go next, because it's very much a uncomfortable, often taboo subject that is hard to talk about. So yeah, that's definitely the plan on our next conversation, to bring that kind of knowledge to Writer's Edge Nation. So we recap the foundation and how important breathing is. And then you gave us some tips on how to start breathing and kind of the either or of what's going on in the pelvic floor. If there's an issue, it's either not working or it's too tight and not relaxing.
Yep. Absolutely.
Awesome. So, Nicole, if there are people listening that are like, oh, I need to chat with Nicole and learn more about this, where would they go to find more information?
So on Instagram, Pelvic Floor Expert, Facebook, Pelvic Floor Expert. You can go to my website, drnicolecoleman.com, and you can send me an email, nicole@drnicolecoleman.com.
Awesome.
That's pretty much it. I'm everywhere else too, but that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay, awesome. So they can get a hold of you on any one of your channels and seek out more information there.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to say thank you for coming on today and dropping all of this pelvic core knowledge.
Yay!
And to our listeners out there, I want to say thank you for tuning in. If this has been helpful, make sure and subscribe, share it out with your friends, leave us a review. Not because we want you to just tell us how awesome we are. Of course, anybody loves that, but the review actually helps us get searched easier. It helps in the algorithm of getting out there and getting shared so that we can get this message out to more people. So thank you for coming on, Nicole.
Thank you. So wonderful. So glad to be a guest. You know, I love your podcast. I listen to every episode as soon as it drops. So It'll be weird listening to myself, but
Oh, I appreciate it so much. And we'll talk about poop, pee, and sex next time we have you on, so everybody can get ready for that.
I know. They can prepare themselves emotionally, because I forget that it's awkward, because that's all I do.
Right.
All day, every day, I'm talking about that. So yeah, sometimes people need to be eased into it.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing. We're working on easing everybody in. We've introed the pelvic core. We've gotten further into it. And then we're going to talk about some other stuff with the pelvis. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Please, you guys share this out. If you found this helpful, share it with your friends. And as always, I will see you down the road.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Writer's Edge podcast today. We appreciate your time and attention. Thank you for always helping us move forward and appreciating a good conversation. Help us keep the conversation going by checking out our social media channels, including Facebook at Writer's Edge Therapy and Wellness, Instagram at Writer's Edge Therapy, and our website, www.writersedgetherapy.com. It is there that you can also book a consult for either you or your horse. Thanks, and we'll see you down the road.